The real way that Warlock used to win this matchup before is when they were running the Void Drinkers and played them down on curve. That's been cut out from this version from Jarla. That's more streamlined to face off against Priest. So I think Jarla's best game plan is actually reliant on Sociologist Militia, which is already in the opener. That's one of the best ways you can actually get on board.
Yeah, it is one of those cards that can just steal matchups, right, and steal wins, because there aren't many decks that run an answer to a Militia, especially if it's you manage to either get value trades with the 3/3s or just not traded with them at all. You know, maybe emptied the board beforehand. So yeah, it is one of those key cards, I think, here. But for Bozzzton, not having too bad of an opening, but none of the key cards of that the Octo or a Field Contact even at this point.
Not quite yet, but at least Neophyte into Mankrik is a decent curve. And for Jarla, I really love the full keep here. Like Spirit Jailer on 1, of course, premium. Scorpid coming down on 3 is just the best thing he can do on turn 3. And then Militia, I've talked about that being the way we can steal the matchup, right? And so I think it's very, very strong to have it in the opener, even though he doesn't necessarily have that many guaranteed ways to shuffle the fragments just yet.
Oh, yep. And you can see already, like, Jarla does not want any fragments drawn until after turn 7 at this point. And you can already see his frustration as one drawn, not only too early, but also that did 0 healing. At least if he tapped into it, then he would have gained something from it in some way.
Yeah, it was just completely wasted here. For Bozzzton, the pickup of the Foxy Fraud makes this turn a lot more amenable because he can activate the Swindle that way. If he had not gotten that, I think he was just looking at a Neophyte into Mankrik curve, but this just makes things a lot cleaner, right? Gives him more options. If he gets Octobot, then he could also deviate from just the curve game plan if there's something better.
Yeah, 100%. The only... Yeah, I guess the one thing to work out is whether he would ever value doing that after playing Mankrik, but I don't think the payoff is worth it, because one, he'd either have to delay the turn, or he would have to like coin Mankrik, then Foxy Swindle and hope for something decent. He's going to go for a little bit of a sideways play here and just play that Neophyte out instead.
I'm glad you pointed out the post-Mankrik game plan, because I think that's the only reason for going about it in this order. Yeah. I would still favor the Foxy Swindle because it gets you closer to Kazakus, which I think is what you would ideally do on turn 4, whether or not there's a Mankrik enraged in the deck or not. But Bozzzton is just going for maybe the better on average play to get Mankrik down, sorry, the enraged Mankrik down earlier. The Neophyte this turn, I'm saying, is not necessarily that good compared to later on, because it's not really deleting any breakpoints from Jarla in terms of spells he really wants to play, right? Drain Soul and Soul Shear still available here, whereas the Neophyte maybe going into turn 8 Nether becomes a bit scarier later on.
Yeah, like even if you could say, oh, well, it blocks School Spirits, it's like, I don't think Jarla would School Spirits anyway, right? Like Rogue literally makes perfect big School Spiritable boards, so then what, you know, he wouldn't want to just throw it out there to kill a 3/2, so yep, I agree. I think it's more Bozzzton just set on this post-Mankrik draw plan, and he just didn't want to pass, so just makes sense to an extent. Okay, Jarla, go. Oh, boo. I was like, just play Shadow Council and let's see what happens. I wouldn't have even hated it.
Yeah. I would have hated it. He kept this Militia for a reason. But I think between that and Hand of Gul'dan, I definitely prefer the Hellfire, because you're talking about how School Spirits can be very strong. Hellfire is the same thing, a bit more expensive, but it has that breakpoint of also catching Kazakus in the 3 damage, whereas School Spirit would not, for example. Jarla playing the Scorpid over Drain Soul in the first place is a bit interesting because he leaves the Cult Neophyte on board, but perhaps doesn't want to waste any more healing because he would have only gotten 2 out of the 3 healing from the Drain Soul, and that can be stronger with Tamsin a bit later on. I think Bozzzton can afford a value trade here. Losing the Mankrik is not a super big deal, but then my thinking is that if you trade the Neophyte into the Scorpid, then Mankrik is still dead to a Drain Soul type turn.
Right.
Whereas if you VT the 1/3, then I guess Drain Soul is still kind of bad for Bozzzton, but at least Jarla would have to like take an awkward trade with the Scorpid.
Yeah, I think this trade, or even just going face, would have been better than trading into the Scorpid there, right? So I do like the choice here from Bozzzton. Jarla again just has to buy some time.
Definitely feels like tap to start the turn. It sometimes feels like Warlock would like to run Mortal Coil here and there, just because they have the 2 damage breakpoint from the School Spirit and then the 3 damage from Drain Soul Soul Shear. But the 1 damage is where it gets to feel like a bit of a waste, just throwing away the Drain Soul. But still, Jarla is going to go for it, and that is now a turn for Bozzzton to start drawing towards the Mancrick's wife. Because he has second field contact, he's okay with playing the first one even for just 2 procs, potentially 3 if the Foxy Shadow Step gets a good second combo activator.
Oh, there's an Octo as the first draw. Looks pretty good to me. Tenwu. Okay. Nothing too crazy.
Hand.
Yeah, nothing.
I mean,
yeah, nothing too crazy for this turn, obviously, but he did the job, right? Like you mentioned, there's a second field contact, so this one was just meant to do a couple of things, and the second one's really going to explode.
It doesn't give Bozzzton a strong next turn, but as soon as he picks up a discounter for the efficient Octobot, it starts to get really spicy, right? Because he has both Alex, Tenwu, and Shadow Step. I suspect he'll have to use the Shadow Step for an Octobot turn beforehand, but it's still relevant to discount combo pieces. For Jarla this turn, I do think it's just the Hysteria into Armor Vendor turn. The Hellfire, I think, gets a lot better than Hysteria next turn if you are expecting a bigger board development from second field contact or even like a Jandis type of board. Just a bit difficult to maneuver Hysteria against Rogue sometimes if they go very, very wide.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Hysteria Armor seems fine here. Again, I think Jarla would he would just like to tap, but that would just leaves him way too open. So yeah, just going to use this area, get it done, and prepare himself for whatever comes next.
It's awkward for Jarla that he hasn't drawn any other fragment shufflers after that first Spirit Jailer, and so there's only 1 fragment in the deck, and the Militia is looking very, very weak. And he doesn't really want to play out Strongman to corrupt the Ticketus just like that, so he will have to tap in the near future to get better answers, I agree. A very awkward hand from Bozzzton.
Efficient is sufficient.
Okay, double Octobot here, knowing that if there is Cascading Disaster, it's not been corrupted yet, so... Okay, only one of them is dying without being procced here, because the rest of the damage from Jarla doesn't happen in increments of 4. Like 3 or lower. And in the off chance that both the Octobots go off, then Bozzzton just has a gazillion damage in hand.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, if 2 Octobots exactly weren't on the board right now, I think Jarla would just look at playing Ticketus, honestly, and just get it out there, just get an 8-8. But with 2 Octos, like, that is just too much.
Oh, these are terrible taps for Jarla. Gets the last fragment, so Militia's doing nothing next turn, and he gets an unplayable Strongman. I think he was just looking for a better way to deal with one of these. I don't know if he's forced on Cascading just to deny 1 Frenzy, but if he could see the hand here, I think he's forced to do that.
Yeah, you just have to press Cascading here. You can't have 2 Octos go off. That is too strong.
Yeah.
He's got
1 proc away. Means Bozzzton now can go for a field contact turn, and it's honestly a formality, but because he's just kind of waiting until he gets 10 mana, at which point he can deal like 22 from hand. Just needs a little bit more damage there. Olgra is going to shore up some of it. If he hits second Wicked Stab, that's huge. If he hits another Shadow Stab, that's huge.
Give me that. Love what I want.
He's going to value using the Plunderer first, because Brain Freeze can be useful once Jarla, or if Jarla starts kicking out the big minions, of course.
And even not looking at the Tenwu Alex combo in hand, this board is already kind of problematic for Jarla because he's like a turn away from Twisting Nether. The Hellfire is going to clean a lot of it up, but it leaves the Mancrick, and he's just taking the 3 damage from the Hellfire itself.
He does have Hysteria though, so he could work out which one he would rather do, because the Mancrik having 7 means that Hysteria can probably get some work done here.
Yeah, a lot of the time it leaves like 3 damage left on board. Bozzzton gonna keep the cycle going with another Prize Plunder. I think it's fine. He really doesn't need those for minion removal.
Oh wow, now with Soul Share, like Hysteria Soul Share could be pretty good here.
So the disaster outcome of Mancrik with Hysteria is it leaves up a 2-3 and a 3-2. I think that's already the worst outcome, and if one of those is a field contact, then he can just Soul Shear.
Right.
Alternative being Hellfire, but then you are just kind of floating the rest of the mana. So I do think I like your play a little bit better. But then again, is there going to be a better Hellfire board than this in the near future? I think top Hellfire is fine. Like, Jarla does have quite some health to work with. The Hysteria might be better against a Kazakus Golem board, potentially.
Yeah, I guess, like, even if he Hellfired, I still wouldn't mind Soul Share, just because it gives him Militia next turn. At least for something, right? 2 rush. 2 3/3s would be fine.
That is true. It's still an above average play for turn 8, even though it's nowhere near the ideal Militia that Jarla kept it in matchup for.
It's mostly that it's not super weak, it's fine, and it procs Ticketus, right? So it allows him to do a little bit more going forward. Here though, Bozzzton does have that Kazakus, and because he's still got the time, as you mentioned earlier, he's kind of waiting for that big turn 10 potential combo. Can just play this Ticketus out and at least pre-stack a Golem.
I think Stealth is absolutely premium because outside of Cascading Disaster, Twisting Nether, a lot of the time it's just damage banked a turn in advance, which every bit of chip is relevant when he's looking at this 16 combo from hand. Sorry, 24. Draw 2? I think he honestly doesn't need that many more cards, but the one way this might go wrong for Bozzzton is into a Militia, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
The one discount from Octobot, the most Bozzzton can actually do in one turn is 24, right? Once he hits 10 mana. He doesn't need to do it all in one fell swoop, though. If he knows that there are not that many fragments in the deck, then he only has to be worried about a certain breakpoint of healing from Malagos, and then finish off with either the Alex combo or the Wicked Stab later on. And that's not even counting the board, but Jarla will be able to finally seize board control here.
Yeah, and he does get that Ticketus finally corrupted now. It feels like such a weird game that, like, both players have done a lot, but we're only on turn 8 and both players are on pretty much full health at this point.
Yeah.
It's so weird that, like, a lot's happened and nothing has happened at the same time.
Felsoul and Baron's Blacksmith both have been stars of top 5 moments at some point. You can just ask Derek about that. I don't think this is a situation where Bozzzton brain freezes his own guy to buff because he's not really getting that much benefit against the likes of Cascading Disaster or Twisting Nether. Brain freeze can be used on the 3-2 instead here. Potentially even held altogether, depending on what this Golem does.
There is just a Shadow Step as well for this, the Jailer.
That's funny, but I think he really wants to save the step for the Tenwu, right, to go with Alex.
Yeah.
Or not. It's just a double Janda's turn. Okay. So this strikes me as very, very weak to Twisting Nether.
Does he step in the... Okay. Yeah, he can do it this turn, right? Because, yeah, this makes the Tenwu 0, which allows him to do a bigger combo next turn. On turn 10.
Well, no, because he can only play Alex twice. It allows him to do an earlier combo, turn 9.
Oh, sure, he can do it next turn, yeah.
But it's only 16 damage. Because he has that Wicked Stab, though, on turn 10 it's still 22 instead of 24, which is like a minimal difference, and he does get bigger payoff from this Janda's. And as it happens, there's no Nether in hand for Jarla. He does have Hellfire School Spirits. which feels kind of necessary here. And he has to trade off the Barons first because if that's not the illusion and he goes for a partial board clear first, then everything else gets buffed.
Can he trade School Spirits and just play Ticketus here, I think? I don't think just clearing this board and leaving it empty again for Bozzzton to do whatever he wants when he knows there's a Golem in hand is a good plan.
It kind of depends where this last illusion is. Yeah, now that he knows he's going to be leaving 7 damage on board, I think the Ticketus is very reasonable.
Yeah, otherwise he's just saying, okay, Bozzzton, do it again, and then he just has less removal, right? So he's just in a big problem. Yeah.
Right, it's only 4 damage like that as well. Jarla hoping that he burns Alex, Wicked Stab, anything like that, but it's only 1 stab that's burned away. And again, Bozzzton has access to 16 here, plus 5 on board and dagger. A little bit short, so I expect him to hold on to the full 22 for next turn instead.
I wonder.
Golem Brain Freeze or Golem Cascading, both seem like strong options.
Well, if he's starting Primordial, then you can't do both, not with Cascading at least. Still though, Brain Freeze on the Ticketus is fine. Like if you just freeze it for a turn or so and just don't worry about it. It's not going to start doing damage, right? He has 2 Brain Freeze in hand, so we can do that for a while anyway.
I'm a bit surprised to see the Steward of Scrolls this turn taken because he can't play it this turn alongside the Golem game plan and Brain Freeze the Ticketus. Maybe he's just getting greedy as possible to get any extra burn in case the damage is not enough next turn. But I feel that the way Bozzzton might lose is if Jarla clears this board and then Bozzzton doesn't immediately have lethal, and then Jarla goes for some big healing plan with the Malagos. But that's a lot of different boxes that Jarla has to check. And at the moment, he's not even fulfilling the full board clear game plan against this stealth Golem.
And also as well, his Yasharaj won't even pull him a Cascading, right? Because the only one he played wasn't corrupted.
That's right. Only pulling him a Ticketus at the moment. Like, he can just go for that and play the 2 strongmen for free. Like, that's 2 taunts on board. A lot of the time that negates damage from Bozzzton.
Right.
But I honestly feel like that might be the best play because the only way to clear the stealth Golem is to go like Hellfire, then Soul Shear, then Cascading.
Yeah, you know what? I think I'm with you. Just Yasharaj, strongman, Ticketus, go, right? And just hope that's enough.
Kind of pushing counter lethal, to be fair.
I mean, it's a lot of damage, right? It's a lot of stats on the board. And the problem is, if Jarla does another, like, half clear or even a full clear, the thing you need to think about is he ever actually going to win the game off that? And I don't know, I think it's time. And yeah, Jarla agrees with us, Jim.
It might get there, honestly, because we're looking at Bozzzton holding onto this 22 combo from hand. And, like, currently, Jarla's at 23. Oh, no, he didn't play the other strongman! Did he rope out?
He must have.
That's a disaster. He's just dead now.
Well, what a strange way to end game number 1. And a disappointing way as well, because Jarla is not normally prone to mistakes, slip-ups, execution errors, as we've just seen, but some of them will cost you, and this one's definitely cost Jarla, as that is just going to be game number 1 going over to Bozzzton.
Like another taunt here would have kept Jarla alive for 1 more turn and would have forced Bozzzton onto removing some minions because Bozzzton was just kind of dying to, what was that, 22 or more presented on board and Bozzzton was fatiguing by that point.
Well, if the taunts went down, there was still 2 Ticketus and Yasharaj, right? Which is insane amount of damage, and Bozzzton would have took 2 fatigue the turn that's his turn to draw, so that would have been insane. That could have been just a different game there, and it could have changed everything, but Jarla just didn't finish his turn, basically, and that is one of the things we do bring up with, you know, some of our slower Grandmaster players here, is it's fine to take your time as long as you're not being punished by the rope. We've seen it happen now and again to Viper. We've seen it happen, well, now to Jarla. We've seen some things happen to Bozzzton as well in terms of turn execution and getting it in before the rope burns you. And that's a problem with the, some of the quicker players don't often run into.
That is very, very true. And while in the grand scheme of things, you can make the argument that this doesn't matter that much for Jarla, as opposed to a loss here would have mattered for Bozzzton, because Jarla's lineup is built to beat Priest 3 times. I think it'll definitely be playing on Jarla's mind in terms of just focus, because he will be tunneled on that error he made of not completing his turn. Right. Which, from our perspective, could have changed the entire outcome of the game. Like, I'm pretty sure Bozzzton could have still maybe maneuvered it to set up a 2-turn lethal and not have immediately died because he had that additional fireball in hand, but it was difficult from that situation for sure. And Jarla will have been hyper aware of those breakpoints after having seen a Tenwu and a Shadow Step used.
And the biggest thing as well is, of course, this is an anti-priest lineup here from Jarla. Okay, he lost to Rogue. It's not the end of the world, but he could be 1-0 up. That's still a big impact, right? That still means you were just one less win away from taking the series and moving straight on to the final day. So it's a big deal there. Bozzzton gets 1 win on the board, and that means he is going to be moving over to his Rush Warrior. And again, this is very much, we saw it in the last series, but this is like stage 1. Sort of not control warrior post mini set here, and I think this is, although may not be the perfect 30 for this type of deck, it's a very, very good initial sort of quick response attempt here from Bozzzton, and I actually like the look of the list overall.
I just think it's fun that he's got new cards in there in the Crush. And actually just the Crush is the technical new card there, because Overlord Starfang has been in the meta for a while, just not really played in any powerful decks. But it does have synergy with Crush, as well as the double Stonewall Anchorman in there, which we saw Bozzzton put to good use against Warma's Token Druid. He's also just added Rattlegore at the top end for, I don't know, extreme levels of greed with the 2 Troublemakers still in there.
The overall list looks fine. I don't really want to talk about the Rattlegore because that's one thing I'm not sure if I'm on board with in general. But again, maybe it's going to pay off for him versus this. Specifically, if he can end up getting it down, it's going to be a problem for Jarla to deal with. But yeah, we'll see what this mulligan looks like for Bozzzton here. With Rush Warrior now, obviously it depends on matchups, but are you a fan of ever keeping conditioning, or is it generally just the play to just draw into it at some point?
In the mirror and against Miracle Rogue, I definitely like holding conditioning. I'm trying to piece together what the reasoning would be against Warlock, whether you'd rather just go for the curve game plan. I think one conditioning would be like worth thinking about, but off coin, I think Bozzzton would really rather value hitting card draw, Watley, for example, and just stage dive, athletic studies, that type of thing, and curving out, because it can be difficult for Warlock to deal with wide boards from Playmaker, for example, if they don't have exactly School Spirits.
Okay, well, let's see how it kicks off so far. Bozzzton does have a start of a curve, but not the rest of it so far, with a couple of 5-drops and Crash, of course, in his opening hand. But Athletic Studies can solve all problems for next turn and maybe the turn after, so we'll see how that pays off for him. Jarla, on the other hand, kept a lot of removal in his opening hand.
And I think it's very warranted in this matchup, because I do think he has the late game to get there, even against this super greedy list from Bozzzton, because while in theory Bozzzton does have like Rattlegore and Sourfang, like he won't necessarily hit the bottom of his deck and see all those cards as fast as Jarla will see all of his removal, because Warlock just has that repeated tap going. For Bozzzton, the Crab Rider is a very good pickup here, just so he has a way to spend his mana, because he obviously wanted to bank the Athletic Studies discount for either of his 5-drops next turn, so that he can curve 4 into 5.
The frustration with the 5-drops he does have is that often versus Warlock, there's nothing to rush into. So
True.
Obviously Runthack not really going to get a big payoff, and Command same. So I would have much preferred to have, say, Watley as his 5-drop in hand at the moment, and not these two, but still not terrible. The Runthack, for example, will force a response from Jarla no matter what.
Very true. As for this choice, I favor the Outrider just as a minion with enough attack on it to actually be a threat. It's also got enough health to survive against a single Drain Soul or Soul Shear. But Broomstick is actually the choice for Bozzzton here. That's super interesting because 2 out of the 3 minions in hand already have Rush on them. But they don't interact well with Scorpid, to be fair. Drain Soul?
And I guess as well, it allows him to force a Frenzy on Kresh, because in control matchups, you can't guarantee Kresh's 8 armor effect from Frenzy is going to go off. But it's something.
True, but I'd struggle to argue that the armor is actually relevant in this matchup, where Bozzzton is the aggressor for sure, right? He doesn't win versus Jiraxxus in the late game. As it stands, the immediate problem of the Scorpid is super annoying because it won't proc Frenzy on the Anchorman and it would immediately kill off the Run Thack. It's probably worth biting the bullet for Bozzzton though, because if he doesn't deal with the Scorpid now, it's going to kill both his Crab Rider and whatever Bozzzton plays the next turn.
Yeah, and at least the Run Thack gets the buff, right? He gets to actually do something here, so I do like this, even though it's a little bit rough for Bozzzton here. And already though, with this hand and no Watley, you start to see the start to look a little bit rough here for Bozzzton because Jarla's got removal coming out of his ears right now.
Pair gamer is Jarla here with his removal. Obviously, you'd gut reaction just slam the Ogremancer this turn, but it feels a little bit weak against Rush Warrior because there's very few spells you want to deny. To be fair, this is going into rank 2 conditioning, so in terms of timing, the Ogremancer probably doesn't get a lot better, but as it happens against Bozzzton's specific hand, the Ogremancer is a welcome sight so that he could actually proc the Frenzy on his Anchorman.
Yeah, I actually even think just like Spirit Jailer tap would be fine here. Because
I think that's fine too, but
Jarla
the other
has,
order...
oh, sure. Jarla has, like, double Siphon, right? So he doesn't need to win board, because any big chunky minion Bozzzton plays, he'll just Siphon Soul it away and not care. Very
true. And, you know, if we're talking about proccing Anchorman, maybe he doesn't play a minion at all. It's just tap pass. I think that's fine. You make a very compelling argument that Jarla has the tools to deal with pretty much whatever. Hand space starts to become an issue if he doesn't play anything, though, because he wants to keep tapping towards, like, Ticketus, you'd have to imagine.
Yeah, this is our lives now, though, because I did just have a second glance at Bozton's list to make sure he's not playing Mutinous, to be like, oh, he could keep Spirit Jailer in hand to play around that. It's like, oh, it's going to be every game now.
I do get confused with the top end because Rush Warrior, it's like Rattlegore, N'Zoth, Alexstrasza, Troublemaker, now Sourfang and Crush all added into the list. There's many different iterations and, you know, that's part of the fun of playing in a brand new meta. Deciding to play the weaker of the Anchorman first, trying to bait out one of the bigger pieces of removal from Jarla, like Siphon Soul, before he plays a bigger minion. And crucially, both minions are still above 3 health, so it takes more than simply a Drain Soul to deal with them. It is awkward for Jarla, but I feel like it's fine to go School Spirit's Drain Soul to deal with the Anchorman. The Crab Rider is very little threat at this point.
So, Jarla is someone who will not use removal unless he feels he absolutely has to, unless he feels he will lose the game if he doesn't use it. So, honestly, the amount of times me and Saul have been casting and we're like, okay, so he probably just does it now, right? He doesn't. Okay, next turn. Okay, probably now because he's under more pressure. He doesn't. And it just goes on, and he wins though, so it's very, very impressive overall. The Kresh is coming down now though, and with that buff, of course, it looks a lot scarier as a 4-10.
I'm glad you brought up Jarla's mindset because now I will stop suggesting removal every single turn. But I do think this warrants a Siphon Soul. It's a big boy.
As a base rule, whenever you would use removal, just add 2 turns and you're probably close. That's...
If it is just Siphon Soul, though, Jarla can think about tap if he wants to potentially coin it out. As it happens, he doesn't really have a turn he's earmarked saving the coin for just yet. Although, I did mention that the armor gain from Crush is not overly significant for the warrior. Like, I don't think Jarla will be pressed if Bozzzton has 8 more health, right? That's not the way Jarla wins the matchup. He wins by removing all of Bozzzton's threats and then eventually in fatigue. So killing off the Crush is more about protecting his Ogremancer, I'd have to imagine.
Yeah.
Even used 2 pieces of removal. I'm shocked.
Well, he looked into the future and knew that if he didn't, he would lose the game. So, and maybe he's making up for the previous game, right? Maybe he's like, you know what? I don't want to just die again when I could have potentially not died. So yeah.
I do think not dying is better than dying in Hearthstone, at least. And in many other aspects.
It often helps win game of Hearthstone, yeah. So, Anchorman is an option here, but Bozzzton's hand doesn't really play too nicely here, so maybe he does just want Anchorman to draw, kill off this Ogremancer, and redraw, and try and set up the board for this Troublemaker.
Yeah, I do think it's a great spot to go for that Anchorman, but because it's already got quite a bit of health on it from the Runthak buff, and then it's just a persistent threat that Bozzzton has just seen a Siphon Soul and a Drain Soul. If the Anchorman warrants any other removal, then he's happy because Troublemaker can then come down a bit safer. And if it doesn't warrant any removal, then Bozzzton just gets to push the 5 damage every turn. Sounds like a win-win to me. Oh, interesting. Not proccing the Frenzy on the Anchorman in order to keep it above 3 health and thus out of range of second Drain Soul or Soul Shear. Also, it's a very bad Hysteria board. Nice setup.
Yep, it's the turn before Twisting Nether as well, so there are very few direct punishes to this Anchorman. And honestly, even if there is a board clear, Bozzzton just slams Troublemaker next turn, so he's just feeling the curve right now, right?
Okay, this is interesting now because Jarla has Drain Soul and Soul Shear to get rid of the Anchorman. He would give Bozzzton a draw off the Frenzy, but I think it's pretty worth because he really wants to save Siphon Soul for the Troublemaker. Could maybe go like Siphon Soul this turn and then think about Hysteria into Troublemaker, because technically if 2 1-attack minions stick, if it's just Troublemaker next turn, Hysteria is a full clear. That is second Siphon, though, used against a deck that is running, like, Rattlegore, Saurfang, etc. But then again, I guess 1 Siphon against Rattlegore doesn't really accomplish that much.
I mean, that's just like a slap on the wrist, I guess, for Rattlegore is 1 Siphon Soul. He's like, oh, okay, that's fine. Bozzzton, again, just does have that Troublemaker. Maybe he's a little bit worried about Nether, because there wasn't a big clear, but I can't see that ever outweighing playing a Troublemaker on curve and dealing 6. It's just too good.
Oh, this has 9 health on it. That's my bad. So the Hysteria is actually not enough on its own to deal with everything. You're right to say that Nether is also a threat here, but for Jarla in this situation, it's Hysteria plus Drain Soul or Soul Shear.
Yep. Ooh, okay. This could be a big deal, actually. If Jarla clears the board this turn and isn't under enough threat next turn to get away with Jaraxxus, then he could start to change this round a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And it is a pretty easy clear this turn. Just wondering if he wants to spend that last 2 mana on a tap as well, because if he does go Jaraxxus, then the card draw is going to be harder to get through from that point onward. I think it's worth it.
It's tough though, right? Because if he taps, then the likelihood of him getting a save for Jaraxxus off is lower, because he'll have less health facing down a mystery board he doesn't know about yet.
I guess the question to ask is, what is the scariest board that can come down at this point? And I think it's Rattlegore is the answer, or second Troublemaker.
Yeah, Troublemaker number 2, yeah.
I think against Troublemaker number 2, he would deviate from Jaraxxus anyway, so I still favor the tap. If it is Rattlegore, though, I think the Jaraxxus comes windmill slamming down. And against this type of board, which is none of the above and just weaker threats, I think the Jaraxxus is also pretty safe, so I do like getting the card draw.
And now Bozzzton's got the choice. He can just keep up the pressure and go Alex face. He's seen that Jarla's used that double Siphon. He's just used the Hysteria plus additional removal to clear up. at this point you have to think that Jarla's running low on removal that can deal with an AA, right? So I do like this from Bozzzton. Just keep on the pressure.
I agree. It's very smart. Jarla doesn't have even Nether to deal with this. Not that he'd feel very happy to just play Nether on one minion. So he's on a tap for a Cascading Disaster out here, I think. Or try to fish for something from Scorpid. Yeah.
Because if
you start Scorpid and then tap, you still have mana to play like Cascading off the top, right?
And also Scorpid could get Hysteria, right? Which then is a fine clear.
Good optimization.
Nope.
I don't think there's anything strong in his race dead pool that lets him deal with this 8/8. Other options are just not playable. I do think he still takes the raise dead as the only card that might have value later on, because the hand is just far too slow for card draw. And then I think he taps for something better to do. I'm wrong though, takes the hand maybe to try and fish for soul fragments a bit later.
What if he just does Armor Vendor Ogrementer this turn? It feels unlikely that he'd die, right?
True. Yeah. Okay, so this is the play to stay alive on board, which is halfway. And it softens the Alex in order to go for, I guess, School Spirits, or even not Jirax's Swing. He can't afford to do that, but something for next turn. If, say, the Armor Vendor sticks, that trade plus the School Spirits.
Yep, and also allows him to draw those fragments, right, to heal him back up. It is important to note as well that Bozzzton is not playing ETC in this list. That was one of the cards cut for one of the new ones that he's put in. So, again, with that knowledge, there's actually, like, limited burn damage that can come out from Bozzzton. So I actually do like this setup from Jarla. And just say, you know what, I'll give myself one more turn, one more set of card draws. Maybe you can get some of those fragments to healing back up again, along with a removal piece.
And maybe before Bozzzton had started this turn, Jarla could have gotten there with the healing. But now we're seeing Watley Samuro as the next draws for Bozzzton, so the value never stops here. Samuro even allows Bozzzton to clear up both these minions without you know, having to send anything into the poison. He can get that weapon swing face. I really underestimated just how strong the turtle spike is. It's 10 damage across 5 turns.
Yeah, it's just always there, isn't it? It just adds up.
Like 2/3 an Ashbringer. Okay, well, at least for Jarla, the Armor Vendor stuck around so he can trade School Spirits, but it just seems like too little, too late.
He does have Twisting Nether.
But that's pretty much his entire turn.
Yeah.
He does know that in terms of burst from Bozzzton, it's super limited now that Alexstrasza has been played, but he still has to be aware of just Fiery War Axe equipped by Sword Eater here, which is 6 damage if the Watley sticks on board. So it can't just be like, say, trade School Spirits Ogremantcer. That doesn't get there.
Right. And that's why I think Jarla might just be pinned in here to actually just go Twisting Nether and hope for next turn.
I think he has to be a bit more ambitious, like School Spirits into even Hand of Gul'dan maybe, and then assume you draw at least 1 fragment, and then he has resources to maybe get a bigger clear next turn. Obviously, it's bad, but it's his one avenue maybe to stabilize and not just stay alive for 1 turn.
Oh, no fragments? Oh. Yeah, Jarla had 8 in his deck, I believe, at that point, and he drew 0. That's very, very rough, and that means Bozzzton is going to get off to or continue to improve in this matchup here, going 2-0. He's got the Rogue out the way, he's got the Warrior out the way, but it all comes down to this, G. It's finally we're going to get to that Priest matchup, and this is the one that Jarla cannot let win, and not only because obviously he loses the series, but this is what the lineup's built to do from Jarla, right? It's to just prey on Priest. And just looking at Bozzzton's Priest list, outside of the addition of Mutinous, and I guess this Soul Mirror in there, there's Archdruid Naralax as well, but other than that, it is fairly standard Priest, right? There's no tech for like super late game. There's nothing that's really going to dig him out of the general scenario that Jarla's expecting, except maybe that Mutinous.
Yeah, that's right. I think the only distinction we can really make across from other priests is that he's not running the N'Zoth package, and so no Light Shower Elementals and no additional healing at the top end. He does have a lot of one-ofs, however. He's got one of Ooze in there, I guess expecting the possibility of Weapon Rogue because that has been a thing in Europe in recent weeks. One Ogremancer and then one Mage Scribe. So there's a decent amount of value there if he is running up into like the Control Warrior matchup. But it's really the Mutinous, like you pointed out, that I think is going to be the big kicker here. He doesn't have any of those big top-end finishers like Ysera or Yogg or even Cthulhu that we're seeing from a lot of different priests. It's kind of a priest list that is more of a Swiss Army knife in my opinion, because you can still generate Ysera a lot of the time off of the Draconic Studies.
Yeah, I agree. I think the scary part about this list is, does it do any one thing well enough, right? One Ogremancer, one Mage Scribe, as you mentioned. I've also thought of a genius new thing they could put into the game. So Hearthstone designers, listen. You know the way you have like Hunter cards, Priest cards, you can't run those cards in other classes, right? Generally speaking. They should have just a tag that is not, you can't play in X. So for example, Mutinous can't go in Priest. Like, that just sounds good to me. Priest has enough little tools like that. They don't need one more. Yeah. Free idea there for you. I won't even charge for that one. But most importantly, let's look at Jarla's first go at taking down the Priest. And it's going to be the one that, honestly, I have the most questions about is, does Spell Mage still just beat Priest in the way it kind of did historically? What do you think about this matchup, Gia?
I still think it's pretty mage favored, but again, I'm in favor of not going Lunacy in this game plan, similar to Control Warrior, where I think the Priest just gets more things to do with the removal if you go Lunacy and start generating boards. It's definitely a tough matchup though, and I think getting flow early is absolutely necessary, on top of also being very aware of when to play your burn spells, because as mage, it's very tempting to hoard everything cheap and all in one turn to burst down the Priest, but Illucia is a perennial threat in the matchup. So I think Mage has to be very heads up about throwing down fireballs, Apexis Blast a bit early, even if it's not immediate lethal. And for Bozzzton, the Lucia is just there immediately. I don't know if it's a keep in the matchup, but I tend to think that's the card I lose to most as Mage.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if this makes any sense, which is a lot of things I say actually, but one thing I'm very interested in again is just this Lunacy plan, because Jarla has been our most confident Lunacy player, is a phrase I'm going to use. In Europe, every single time Lunacy is an option, I think he goes for it pretty much every time, no matter at what point in the game, and he seems happy to do so and has won a lot of games off the back of it as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see again if this is a matchup he just says, you know what, I've drawn Lunacy, it's in my deck, I'm going to play it, or not. But just to start off with, Bozzzton looks like he has a fantastic opening hand, just simply because that double palm reading for me, Gia.
Yeah, palm reading is a heck of a card. Not really discounting anything too insane here, but pickup of Alex could be very relevant later as an additional amount of healing. But Raven, did I... okay. I was going to say, did I step away from Europe because there's no flow? But I'm back because there's Lunacy discovered off of Ruined Orb.
Yeah. Instead of spirit animals, there's just spirit cards right now, and Jarla's spirit card is definitely Deck of Lunacy. And clearly by picking it, right, he's just decided he's playing Deck of Lunacy this game. It's just done and dusted.
I think it's as good a time as any, because this hand without flow, I don't think gets there against Priest, right? Even on the natural burn game plan, if everything costs its regular cost, the fair amount, that's not enough to beat the often unfair Priest. So go ahead, Lunacy before any discounts, so there's a full chance of getting the Grand Slams, which is notably a lot more difficult for Priest to clear compared to, say, Control Warrior, because they're not just brawling that. Hysteria doesn't full clear. They often need to get like a big Xyrella in order to deal with all of those.
What to do?
Yeah,
Jarla can think about an early devolving missiles if he wants to mess with Bozzzton's Raise Dead pool, for example.
That's
the missiles gets like sometimes a bit better later in this matchup, but maybe not so much compared to, say, the N'Zoth list, where you really want to save that for Light Shower Elemental.
Also, it's kind of weird as well, right? Where the missiles, it becomes more of a weird card in a post-lunacy world, right? Because you don't have the additional tools to bank on it, right? You know, like missiles into mask, for example, to use that like general reduction of health on the board to your advantage. So it gets a little bit strange to use. Bozzzton's going to go digging again, though.
First palm reading gives the ability to choose another apotheosis, which I feel is pretty premium because a lot of the time I think a priest should be decently fine just throwing down an apotheosis for no healing, just to have a minion that's resistant to combustion / brain freeze. And so having one in his back pocket for healing later on top of one to maybe get the Scarpid to a very healthy, unremovable life total is also relevant. But against this lunacy now, I wonder if Bozzzton was thinking that he could have picked that, or wishing that he could have picked removal instead, additional condemn, for example.
Yeah, no, he does pick up the Sethic, so he can start generating some of that removal he's after, as Priest does enjoy doing. A bit of a whiff for now. He does have that Renew that I think is worthwhile just chucking on a minion here. He has double Apotheosis, has Desperate Prayer for actually healing himself. Seems fine to me.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Now that the Lunacy's been played, Bozzzton is shifting away from like saving all this healing to outlast Mask, Apexis, Mask, and Fireball from Jarla. It's all about trying to gain board and not lose to something like a Grand Slam or even just stand against Darkness, into Vivid Spores, all that type of madness. Gift of Luminance, yeah, if the Sethic sticks, that's just infinite value.
Oh, and now especially with he gained that Raised Dead, means that if there isn't a Devolving Missiles, then he gets a pretty decent just insta Raised Dead, if that's what he wants to go for. And now the silliness begins.
Pretty good first few outcomes from Jarla there. Like the Expendable Performers is a full clear, and then he gets to stick 5/1/1s. I think that's a pretty good deal. But he is going to go for Devolving on 2 minions now, which is diluting the Raised Dead pool even further. Ping Barricade.
It's tough, right? Because like, yeah, Barricade Ping looks pretty good. Guess he wants to get rid of these minions so they can't get rebuffed. But I was even just looking at, do you just use the mana while you can for just Arcane Intellect, just to get deeper into like the deck of Lunacy?
Definitely worth thinking about, but I do like the idea of having like a couple threats on here because, like you said, there are probably more buff spells from Bozzzton after all that Sethic generation. Area is just traditionally a pretty good card, but there's a lot of actual outcomes from Lunacy that you'd want to have Holy Nova against, like Glowfly Swarm, Stand Against Darkness, Expendable Performers, that Hysteria is actually worse. So I wonder if he takes Holy Nova. Maybe it's still just Hysteria because Nova's a bit redundant with the Condemn, but I feel like Hysteria is a bit harder to pull off against most of what Lunacy generates.
Yeah, and you're also kind of, in a good way, planning for the worst, right? Like, yes, Bozzzton has a Condemn, but why not have 2 Condemns or 3 Condemns, right? You know, in the way you're going to be facing a lot of board-focused things here from Jarla, so why not have a turn where you can go Condemn and Nova, which he could do next turn, for example. So I'm actually with you on the Nova pick there, but Bozzzton is going to go in for that Hysteria. Is he going to play the Hysteria this turn? Is that what he's after?
I figured if he takes Hysteria, then the strongest reasoning would be to play it this turn for the full clear, but he's going to fully hold on here, wait for Jarla to develop a little bit more. To be fair, Bozzzton's under very little pressure, and he still has quite a bit of healing in hand. It's just funny that the Mutinous might be stranded with nothing to eat in the near future.
What to do?
And if you're Jarla, the card draw looks pretty tempting here, but this might be a decent spot to develop the Ring Toss as well, because he's already ahead on board, right? He could go for Disruption at this point. Something like Mirror Entity could also potentially be very strong against Bozzzton, who is running Onyx Mage Scribe and has that Dragon from Studies in hand Jarla knows about.
Yeah, I like this, right? He's going to keep at worst 2 2/4s on the board, or I guess a 2/3 2/4 if he wants to trade. And that's just good enough, right? He can just take this turn off, like you said, and then he still has Mass going forward. He has Arcane Intellect to draw into more stuff. Did get Oasis Ally and I guess Nether Windfall. It's going to be the choices here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are decent as far as disruption goes, but missing on Entity I feel is a bit painful because I think it's the best one in the spot for Jarla. The Netherwind's still kind of okay though. The important thing is he leaves himself, he takes this one slow turn in order to set up for what's very powerful in terms of like AI plus one of these 4-cost spells next turn, depending on what Bozzzton develops. If it's minions, then Jarla can clear with the performance, and if it's nothing big developed, then he can just send 10 to face with this mask. And Bozzzton can start with Ooze if he's thinking Mirror Entity is a possibility, and then he can go Raise Dead as a tester for Counterspell because his Raise Dead pool is frankly quite awful at the moment, and then he can go Condemn. Although the Condemn's not super clean into these Barricaders, huh?
Yeah, and the problem with the Raise Dead as well, although it's a good test because we know it's bad, if it's not Counterspell, then he ends up just getting the terrible minions he has to dump out of the hand too.
Yeah. He'll also be very scared of Rigged Fair Game at this point, which he cannot play around in any way.
The only bonus about that is he'll know very quickly whether it's rigged or not. Oh, okay.
Interesting. A poison available for Jarla. There's like nothing good for Mage Rite if you don't have weapons. Maybe Nitro Boost can buff a minion, but that's it. Well, this looks like as good a turn as any to start drawing for Jarla. The Mask of Cthulhu can come down if nothing better presents itself as an option. Oh, that's so strong next turn.
Oh, wow, okay. Double Survival of the Fittest. Not a lot of the time you're looking for one can be fine, but anything more than one is a little bit rough.
And because these are so expensive, I'm looking at, yeah, Nourish for Ramp. I think it's pretty strong here. Allows Jarla to both play Fittest and, say, Arcane Intellect next turn. While he does take one slow turn this turn, it's kind of fine. Develop another Barricade, ping, trade one Ooze away, and then he sticks so many minions for a potential survival.
Time runs out on me.
Oh, could even trade away both of these Oozes.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, well, he might leave one up, right? Because he has its Oasis Ally is the secret, so he might want it procced. He leaves it up, and then next turn he can play Barricade and Survival in the same turn, which means he didn't have to play the Barricade this turn. Of course, he loses out on potential setup damage, but still, I quite like this play.
Yeah, that's very true. The one damage Ooze, even if, say, an Apotheosis gets stuck on it, like Jarla can't really be bothered about 3 healing. Yeah. That's not threatening whatsoever. And now Bozzzton knows that this last secret is either Oasis Ally or Ice Barrier, which Jarla would probably never take Barrier if it were presented to him, so I think Bozzzton has a strong read. So he will be thinking about Survival of the Fittest, and the Grand Slam as the biggest threats at any point. You'd have to imagine Survival is even more threatening because Jarla's just been somehow ahead on board this entire time. But the Condemn is looking a little bit awkward here. Hysteria also doesn't get the cleanest job done.
Yeah, nothing just adds up, right? I mean, at this point, I'm even wondering whether just, well, maybe not now for Bozzzton, because now he has information on the secret.
Oh, this is smart. Yeah, Hysteria on the procced Water Elemental is super powerful here. He does get the full clear. Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, one up.
Still a very good outcome though, and doesn't give Jarla an additional poison, although I actually don't think the poisons are that good for Jarla. But he's seen a big clear now, so he has to be tempted at least to go for Performers.
Right.
It's very weak to something like Condemn though. It's a bit rough that he can't fit in the survival buff on the same turn he plays the Performers, even with the Nourish ramp.
After seeing Hysteria, what if he just goes Barricade Survival this turn and just has 2 pretty big minions?
Pretty decent, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just
if Jarla could help it, he'd love to like have the survival for more immediate damage, but there's just not a good way he can set up a durable board. So I like where your head's at.
And the thing for me is like he's playing something into removal he's already seen been used very recently, as opposed to like playing a card into removal that he's not even seen yet. Hence the condemn or anything like that.
Well, there's a way to set up a more durable
5-drop
and 2 water elementals. I don't think he plays it all at the same time necessarily, like parsing out the threats and maybe saving a Pexis to go along with survival on all in one turn seems quite strong. But I do like the deep freeze at least this turn.
What if he just does play it all at the same time? I'd be so tempted. Just because again he's seen his Syria be played, right? So it's like I'll just be like, oh, it's as unlikely as it's going to happen. Let's go and just play it all. But no surprise, Jarla are going to be a lot more sensible about the game than I am.
Bozzzton plays 1 Soul Mirror as well, naturally in the list, so that's also going to be playing on Jarla's mind a little bit. I do like the more disciplined approach of metering out his threats over a couple turns, and this is already a board that requires being cleared because survival of the fittest is just pushing 21 damage if it's all left up.
Also, this Elucia is just a pretty dead card right now, right?
Agreed.
Because even at its most simplest form, Jarla would get to just Alex him in the face, which is a bit of a no-go when you're being pressured to this extent.
Bozzzton going for the desperate prayer into Elucia, trying to dump something relevant here, and he is able to play a Pexis Blast. The very cool thing to note here is that I remember you and Sottle were talking about how like overgrowth is worse than flow because you don't actually discount that much mana. Like you gain 2 per turn, but the flow discounts like 25 mana.
Yeah.
In this instance, against Elucia, like it's pretty good to have gone for the ramp because Jarla has that mana to play with, whereas Bozzzton doesn't have the discounted hand.
Yeah. Oh, did he not finish? Oh.
Uh-oh.
Twice in one series, guys. 1 from each player. And it's not the first time Bozzzton hasn't finished a turn like that as well. I remember, I think it was a Libram Paladin one that did not go well for him either. And I think he might have been against Jarla as well when it happened, unless I'm just making things up. But anyway, still not being able to clear off that elemental. It's just extra damage that he just didn't need to take.
And minion left up is a big deal because Jarla gets to dump this Apotheosis without having to spend mana on anything else prior. In terms of what he dumps, I think it's still just, Alex to face, push everything face. He knows that the hand he'll be returning to Bozzzton has 0 removal. It has, like, what's that called, a race guard? Yeah, like 1 barricade minion, but that's it.
Right. And the problem is, there's pretty much no removal, and Bozzzton now knows there needs to be removal because he's just seen double Survive of the Fittest, a Mask, and a Pexis Blast. Like, he's seen all the different ways that Jarla can deal damage next turn, and he's got to do something to get around it. So this Renew needs to put in a lot of work.
It is a very welcome top deck, though, because, like you said, it needs to be removal and healing because there's just, like, minimum 15 burst from Jarla's hand next turn, right? Of course, if the board is clear. Yeah, all terrible.
Shadowwood Runes, really? Oh, right, yeah, 1 mana off, never mind. I keep thinking he's on 10 mana because Jarla's been on 10 mana for so long.
Yeah.
Okay, Shadowwood Rune would have been sick.
Quickly.
Just can't clear everything this turn. Only 6 damage worth of trading power, but 8 health of minions left. He can get rid of the Alex, but this water elemental is living to see another day.
The Mage Scribe does a very good job in like pushing back this mask though, right? Like the 9 health is a very, very big deal.
Yeah, the fact that Jarla doesn't have like minion removal specifically for the Mage Scribe is a big deal here. He can push like 14 maximum with Apexis and Survival Fittest all to the face, but by that point you'd probably rather just mask. The Tidal Wave is kind of awkward because it would kill off his own water elemental.
What if he goes like Barricade Survival and then push damage? Or trade the 4/9? He has then a Pexis Blast and Mask that you could still do.
I do like that idea. I mean, Jarla doesn't know about the generated Shadow Word Ruin. He just knows like about these 4 left-hand cards and then some generated nonsense from Bozzzton, which, you know, if it's not AoE, then the Barricade survival turn is very strong. It's a Talon as well. Wow. Not that it's going to pull anything from the deck, but Divine Shield minions are even stickier and annoying.
Yeah, I'll work out whether he wants to trade.
Oh man, I was so scared. That was right at the end of the rope there. And Bozzzton, I think, will be very happy about this trade because he has 9 more health to work with, and the Shadow Word Ruin is going to put in some major work here.
Yeah, and most importantly as well, he's seen the Apexis Blast, so now he knows, at least guaranteed, there's just the mask he has to worry about that he knows of, as opposed to mask plus Apexis Blast, which is obviously terrifying.
In terms of what he does with the rest of the turn, I'd have to imagine weaving in heals here and there is very valuable because of that mask that you mentioned, and he can still play Water Elemental. It's very strong. He develops minion health and gets that incremental healing to play around mask 2 ways. Oh, Jarla's reaction is honestly very justified. He was all in on that board. Right now he has no minions to put the second survival on, and only 1 more 7 cost spell that he kind of really needs to beat. No Grand Slam! And it is the Grand Slam! Okay.
Yep, there is a plan.
Is it this turn? I would be very tempted to play it this turn.
Well, what if he does Tidal Wave Mask this turn instead, and tries to set up Grand Slam?
Yeah, I think that's also very strong. Probably just straight up better, right? Because the Nagrand is kind of a disaster if they hit like 2 of them into the Water Elemental.
Yeah, then they freeze, yeah.
Just going about it in the other order is kind of saying, my Grand Slam is kind of like a Mask of Cthulhu in the sense that if the board is clear, it's dealing more damage. And
Jarla's gone for card draw. I would love to just know what he would want to have drawn into. And I'm not saying he's wrong, I'm genuinely meaning I would love to know what he was digging for, because I don't know what would be better than just Tidal Wave Mask this turn. Or Grand Slam, whichever one you favour out of those 2.
Yeah, maybe he was just planning on Nagrand either way and started with the card draw, but I do think your line made a lot more sense, and maybe now Jarla's had more time to think about it. Okay, he's just going to play the Slam, and especially with the Cycle of Hatred, there was a world where you think about just like holding on for a turn, going for a big clear with either Tidal Wave Cycle or Tidal Wave Mask, and then trying to clear the runway for the Nagrand Slam. As it happens, the Nagrand this turn is still pretty powerful, but Bozzzton has, I guess, a chance at clearing everything.
So he can trade into the...
I must consider.
Is it best for him to trade into the 3-2 or not? If he wants
so
to go
awkward.
Hysteria.
I don't think that's best because that'll clear 2 minions maximum. But then if you trade into a different minion and freeze that, then you have to also win a lot of 50-50s to unfrozen minions. It's really difficult to optimize. Bozzzton is trading elsewhere first. Okay. Feels like an average outcome.
He does have Taunt, and he does have whether he goes for Naralex or something else to join this, or whether he goes for Hero Power, for example. Like, this is tricky. He probably does need to play an additional actual minion, so Naralex is probably a no-go, right? Oh, Desperate Prayer. Oh, he doesn't go for it. Never mind.
Oh. I'm shocked by that, because the taunt double functions as defending from the 3-1 and the mask.
And the mask, right? Yeah. I thought that was definitely a taunt into Desperate Prayer turn.
I agree. He would have had the mana to play it as well. And Jarla, I think, should be able to find a lethal here between the Hex, the Cycle, and the Mask.
Yeah.
Is it 1 off?
Wait,
Am I being super stupid here?
He masked for 10. He masked for 10. That's 13. He can't ping. He can mask. He can go face, cycle, mask, ping.
Well, I'm trying to fit in the Hex here because the Hex is essentially 2 damaged, bringing the Scorpion down to 1 HP. So Bozzzton is at 15.
But the cycle clears it all, right? So he does this. He goes face, cycle, mask, ping is lethal, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the simpler way. Good job.
I was worried there. I was like, I'm sure this adds up. I'm sure it does. But Jarla does. end that game, gets the victory, but that felt like it was a bit of a struggle, didn't it? Like, Jarla felt like he was always in control, but it never felt like he was just quite going to get there, and that was probably the closest matchup when you look at the rest of his decks, but that was one he could have lost. That was a bit scary.
Yeah, towards the end there, if he had not picked up exactly in the Grand Slam as that third 10-cost spell, then he was in a lot of trouble. There's no good way to get on board, and Bozzzton was slowly stabilizing to a point where just the mask wasn't enough to threaten the lethal, but the Grand Slam came in at as clutch a time as ever, even though we weren't necessarily certain that it should have come down. The turn it came down, it definitely, I think, was Jarla's priority because he still knew a lot of what was in Bozzzton's hand, right? Just useless cards like Mutinous and Mancrick, and if there's no way to immediately kill off all of the Rhinos, which there wasn't for Bozzzton, or at least he had to go digging for that last way of clearing the 3-1, then Jarla was in a very good spot to close it out with the Mask of Cthulhu there.
Again, though, it's just been a tough series so far because although Jarla did play out the bag, one, Bozzzton just didn't clear the Water Elemental, which I believe dealt an additional 5 damage because of that, because it received the Apotheosis.